Hello. I'm still checking sound and visual. I think we're okay. I've been having a lot of trouble uploading this presentation because originally I was going to do it on my iPad, but then that turned out not to be compatible with something else that I needed to use in order to get it to YouTube. So that's what the delay has been about, plus the many classes that I've been teaching. But this is a presentation that is related to the project that we're going to start doing on Tuesday. The last module of our class is related to otherness, and we talked a little bit about it when we were going over things on Tuesday. The idea of otherness for philosophers connects to the idea of who is my other when I engage in relations with people, right? I am somebody's other or alter, like in alter ego. I'm their other, their counterpart, right? So in philosophy, studies that have to do with intersubjectivity are specializing in precisely that part of how we relate to others and what it means to relate to others, right? Because as I have in the questions there, I I will have another, right? When I engage with you guys are my other, but at the same time there is an other for myself, right? I am an other for other people. I am another in this political system. I am not part of what America's idea of citizens is, precisely because I am not a citizen, right? So in that not having the same status, I already become another. When it comes to patriarchal cultures, I am not a male, I'm a female, and in that way I'm another. But that doesn't mean that the male in a patriarchal society is not also another, right? The problem with otherness is how do we recognize that this other body that is in front of me deserves rights or deserves to be treated in a proper way. And that's precisely what intersubjectivity tries to approach. Uh, Philosophers such as Levinas, Lacan, Zizek, Martha Nussbaum, Gloria Anzaldúa, Edward Said, and Iris Marion Young, the last four we're going to be reading for class, um, precisely talk about that, the way in which I relate or others relate to and through me in order to gain a more complete understanding of the world. So if you think about your ethics classes or even about like the way in which your parents taught you ethics or you teach ethics to your kids, right? We have the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want them do unto you. In Confucius, the golden rule is stated in a negative sense. Do not inflict on others what you would not want done unto you, right? But the application of the golden rule, as easy as it seems, right, because the prescription is really clear, it actually hinges upon us recognizing that that other person, that other subject, is actually someone who deserves that kind of respect, right? So if we think back to the example of Tuesday, De las Casas defends the Indians and he talks about them as an other who deserves respect. They are not natural savages, they're not natural slaves, therefore the crown, the Spaniard crown, has to treat them in a different way. However, he doesn't initially extend that same form of treatment to African slaves, and he actually allows and vouches for them being brought to the Americas, right? We have that in Nazi Germany. In my ethics class, we were talking about existentialism. So in Nazi Germany, you have this idea that the Jewish, the black, the gypsies, the homosexual, they're wearing an other. They were not a subject that demanded recognition. Therefore, I could act towards them in any way I wanted without really having a duty and obligation or a sense of responsibility. Um, Nazi Germany is usually like the big example of this, precisely because of the philosophers that we're going to have who talk about the failure to see the other at that point. Levinas is precisely a philosopher who comes out of his experience as a Jewish person in post World War II Europe, right? But if you think about it, in America, there have been some phenomenal, sad but phenomenal examples of these not being able to see the other. The way in which the Chinese were exploited when the construction of the railroad, the way in which the Japanese were put in internment camps, the way in which slaves brought from Africa were treated and are still classified, right? People from Africa and African descent are still classified in the US as if they had lower status. So, this question of who is another and what does it mean to be another is actually something that is really important for social and political philosophy. Because of that, one of the things that I want to concentrate on is this idea of the other and his or her invisibility, right? Some of you work in catering, and in catering, I was reading your descriptions for, or your reflections rather, for Marx, and a bunch of you touched upon the point that you are there serving people, but they really are not looking at you, right? Other than the tray that goes in front of you, who you are, what you represent, what you stand for, does not have room in catering. Well, now imagine that that is the case in political life, right? Who is the person who can't be seen, or who are the people who are usually not recognized as being part of the political discourse in the country, in the place, in the time in which we're talking about, right? Um, in Mexico, we have this very curious way of asking if somebody's knocking or somebody like did something wrong, right? You hear a noise and somebody asks, like, who is that or what was that? And the immediate response is, no one. I am no one, right? So there's this idea that in order to not bother people, instead of becoming another who inserts himself or herself in the conversation, we become another who hides and shies away. Sometimes we do it because it's convenient to us, sometimes we do it because we have been educated as to assume this invisibility or inalterity, and sometimes we do it because we have been what Marx called develop a false consciousness, and we actually think that we don't really matter, right? So the political minority usually has to struggle with this idea of recognition and gaining a voice. Those who don't count, those we cannot see, are also expressions that we use in order to talk about this other and his or her invisibility. Some philosophers who talk about this in a very cohesive and coherent way are Martha Nussbaum, Gloria Anzaldúa, Edward Said, and Iris Marion Young. Martha Nussbaum's excerpt on Blackboard is from her book Not for Profit, and in it, Martha Nussbaum talks a lot about the idea of narcissism, but also the idea of shame and disgust that for her portrays our first moment of what she calls moral distancing, where if I'm afraid of you or if I don't like you, I'm gonna say things like you smell, you look dirty, right? Nussbaum talks about how that might be part of a lack of education and an idea to be kind of loyal to the ideas of egocentrism and ethnocentrism, or this idea that she mentions there on what the excess of evil is according to the times, right? Japanese internment camps. America put Japanese in those camps because they were seen as dangerous. So we put them in a very specific category of the other, as the other who threatens my own identity, right? Um, Edward Said is a an American-born but Palestinian thinker. He created, according to many people, he is the one who created comparative lit, and he initiated that at Columbia University. Edward Said, in the book, the excerpt that you're reading comes from a book that's called Orientalism, and Said talks about what colonialism has done to, especially he concentrates on the East and the Arab world, right? He has a lot of excerpts about how the Europeans treated the Egyptian people, for example, the kinds of descriptions, the kinds of epistemological assertions that they made about who the Europeans are and how the Arabs are not that smart, right? The problem with this idea of Orientalism or Orientalizing the other is that sometimes we see the Oriental subject as someone who is exotic, right, but unreliable. I was talking to one of my students, and he fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we were reading Said, and he said, yeah, this is precisely how they taught us to see the enemy, as someone who is not as smart and dedicated and loyal as we are. And obviously that's painting a caricature of the other, right? But it serves a goal, it serves a purpose. Not to talk too much about it, so I'm going to switch to the other philosopher. Gloria Anzaldúa, she is a political activist, not really a philosopher, but as a Chicano woman, that is a Mexican American woman born in the US with very strong indigenous ties, who also happens to be a lesbian, she sees herself as a bridge into many kinds of otherness. She sees herself as a hybrid who embraces all these different othernesses that are not usually recognized and that are fought upon, right, as part of the formation of her identity. So as that, and from that edge, she wants to write what is called writing of resistance. You'll see in the excerpt, in the chapter that I uploaded, that she writes in 3 different languages and she never offers a translation. And that is a move that is part of the writing of resistance that she has. And if you choose to engage with Gloria Anzaldúa, you will have to address that as part of your presentation. The last philosopher that we have is Iris Marion Young. As I was mentioning on Tuesday, her essay is called The Breasted Body, and it comes from a book that is called Throwing Like a Girl, and they're all essays about what it means to be a woman in a society like the US and the West, right? Girls are not seen as women all the time. We are women after we have developed, but that part of development has to do more with the objectification of the body. And Iris Marion Young talks about how we are objectified by both men and women. If women see another woman who has rather large breasts, we don't think that she is as smart and cool and sensitive as someone who doesn't have big breasts. But if you see someone who has a pretty flat-chested figure, right, even in that sort of vocabulary, we're already imposing a judgment on the qualities that that woman has, whether she's going to be nurturing, manly, womanly, matronly, or what. So your task is to choose one of these philosophers and create a small presentation. You can download these slides in order to have the information with you. The most important step right now is that I need you to sign up for this project. You have till Monday at 5 p.m. to email me and let me know who you will be reading. In the event that the philosopher or activist you choose is taken, I will assign you, or I will ask you who else you want to read. Okay?